This week, we welcome Joseph Salazar, the technical deception engineer at Attivo Networks, to discuss how to disrupt attacks at the endpoint with Attivo Networks. Then Badri Ragad... I didn't practice pronouncing his name. Badri, he's the Director of Product Management, and Sumedh Thakar, the President and Chief Product Officer from Qualys, will join us to discuss the challenges associated with securing container environments and some of their solutions to help you with that. In the security news, not all cyber attacks are created equal. Google patches 2 more Chrome 0 days. What does threat intelligence really mean? Cobalt Strike leaked source code. DNS cache poisoning is back. It's awesome. Or not really. I guess it depends on your opinion. And zebras and dots. All that and more on this episode of Paul's Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly. For security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly. Are you an enterprise dissatisfied with overpriced analytics software that can't keep up with modern data? If so, then GravWell is the solution for you. GravWell is an unstructured data analytics platform for enterprises who demand total data visibility across their network. GravWell lets your security team go beyond the SIM and fuse data sources to correlate and answer questions you didn't know needed to be asked. Go to gravwell.io/Security Weekly for an unlimited data trial and gain uncompromising visibility today. Qualys has brought together vulnerability management and patch management, letting security teams discover vulnerabilities and apply patches immediately, all within a single, unified app. Sign up for a free trial of Qualys VMDR, vulnerability management, detection, and response today at securityweekly.com/Qualys. The average large enterprise has 24 million vulnerabilities. The good news is only 5% will probably be exploited. But which 5%? That's where Kenna comes in. Kenna Security's modern vulnerability management technology combines real-time threat intelligence, data science, and automated risk analysis to prioritize the vulnerabilities that pose the biggest threat to your organization. Team up with Kenna Security and make the most of your limited resources. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Kenna Security.
And welcome to the show. But first, let me introduce you to a man. Oh, crap. I forgot to figure out how to pronounce his name. Mr. Paul Askadornov.
Welcome to Paul's Security Weekly. It's episode number 674, recorded on November 12th, 2020, right here in G-Unit Studios. At least that's where I am. All of my fellow hosts this evening are remote. Mr. Jeff Mann is here with us. Jeff, welcome.
Thanks, Paul, and shout out to the Marines celebrating their 245th birthday on Tuesday, and of course Veterans Day yesterday. It's kind of like Military Awareness Week around here.
Yes, thank you to all of those who serve. Thank you for your service. Mr. Larry Pesce is here with us.
Yes. Yay, back again.
Yes.
That's Lee. Stop.
That looks like Lee.
That's Lee. That's Larry.
That's hey, that guy.
Lee Neely's here with us too. Lee, welcome.
Good to be here. And yes, definite shout out to our veterans and our Marines. Hoorah.
Mr. Tyler Robinson is here with us.
Hola, happy Thursday. Hopefully you know where your sock team is at.
Yes. I don't know where some of my socks are, but that's different. I hate that. Security Weekly, in partnership with the Cyber Risk Alliance, is excited to present Security Weekly Unlocked on December 10th, 2020. The inaugural edition of Security Weekly Unlocked also celebrates Security Weekly's 15-year anniversary and will feature talks from Ron and Cindy Gula, Kevin Finisterre, Vivek Ramachandran, and many more. The agenda is live. Go to securityweekly.com/unlocked. Register for this completely free event. This segment is sponsored by Attivo Networks. Please visit securityweekly.com/Attivo Networks to learn more. Joining us today from Attivo Networks is Joseph Salazar. He is a technical deception engineer at Attivo, also a retired major from the U.S. Army Reserves, having served 22 years as a counterintelligence agent, military intelligence officer, and cybersecurity officer. Thank you for your service, sir. He joins us today to talk about how to disrupt attacks at the endpoint using Attivo Networks technology. Joseph, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's nice to have you here. Joseph, I just want to start with a little bit about your background that goes above and beyond the bio that I just read off of my teleprompter. How did you get your start in information security?
So that's a really funny story. I was originally a legal studies major from Berkeley, and I was planning on becoming a lawyer. So I was working in a law firm in St. Louis while my now wife was going through grad school. And I got a random call because I ended up doing a lot of their IT work because I am, as most people are in my generation, a gamer. I got a call from a company that sort of pivoted me over into IT support. And then from there, it was a very short hop, skip and a jump over into IT security. And 20-something years later, I'm still doing it. So I must be having fun.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Joseph, most people think of deception. Many actually probably still think of it as honeypot technology. And Attivo is not only using deception technology, but also advancing your ability, or Attivo's ability, to thwart attacks. Joseph, I'd like you to start and just kind of very quickly take us from honeypot to deception, and then segue into how Attivo is helping folks today, specifically on the endpoint, with things such as lateral movement.
Sure thing. So honeypots are what, 15, 20 years old? A lot of the research started with open source, and the problem with honeypots though was that they were really good for research, but they weren't good for threat detection, if that makes any sense. You didn't set up a honeypot to detect a threat. You set up a honeypot to figure out what's actually hitting your external interface. Fast forward to today, where deception is much more involved within network threat detection. The idea being that an attacker is going to move around your network and he's going to touch certain things. And touching things that aren't real production, but are actually decoys that will alert you, is how you can detect them very efficiently, very early in their attack cycle. And I'll go into a bit more of that actually when I talk about some of the new capabilities. But just to clarify something, we're not what you would consider a typical deception company. We're a threat detection company. We just happen to use deception as one of the tactics that we use to detect attackers.
Fantastic. And so when you're under the assumption that an attacker is going to land on an endpoint, correct? Is that
yes?
Kind of
that's pretty much a given that they will get in at some point. And having done red teaming and pen testing, it's kind of trivial to get in.
Yeah.
I mean,
agreed. So Joseph, essentially, like the technologies that I've observed in the deception space, if you just get down to the fundamentals, is things like honey tokens and things like lying to the attacker when you think it's an attacker, or putting false flags out there. The technology today, especially from Attivo networks, goes a lot deeper than that. Okay, if you could expand on that, that'd be great.
Sure. So a lot of what we do now is just, it's well beyond what you would consider even modern deception, right? So a lot of deception providers nowadays will set up honey tokens in the form of credentials. They're going to set up emulated systems for their network decoys or network sensors, however you want to call it. We differ in that we always use full operating system VMs for full decoys. And so you can customize them as completely as you can. You can make them blend in. And the idea behind a decoy is to blend into their operational environment, right? You don't want an attacker to be able to tell the difference between a real system and a decoy. So part of that is then setting it up at the network. But there's more beyond that. You can do things at the network, at the endpoint level, where you can set up not only those honey tokens and fake credentials, but you can do things like hiding local admin accounts, hiding local files and folders. You can even do things like change what they see when they query Active Directory, right? The things that an attacker will do to break out of an endpoint once they've done the initial compromise are things that we will detect and prevent. So beyond just detecting, which is what a lot of deception providers do, we actually can do prevention. And I'll get into that when I start showing a little bit more of the presentation. But where we differ is that we've gone beyond just detection using deception. And so whether it is at your network, at your endpoint, and your Active Directory, with any number of different devices like IoT, SCADA, ICS, we can even do things native to the cloud like containers and S3 buckets and serverless functions. You know, those are all things that we consider bread and butter to our detection function. But beyond just detection, like I said, we've now added the prevention piece, and we can also do concealment, which is another aspect of deception that most people don't think about, most people don't really consider.
How do you differentiate an attacker from an actual user, or does it matter? And then from a response standpoint, how do you know if a real user maybe has gone into and hit some type of deception technology versus an attacker?
So the goal with a deception fabric is to make sure that it doesn't interrupt regular operations. Your regular users should not be touching the deception environment during the regular duties. When they slip out of what those regular duties are and they start doing things they're not supposed to do, then they can trigger the deception detections, right? And that's how you can detect insiders or trusted third parties that may have access to your network, like suppliers, contractors, temporary workers, things like that, right? So it's not just about detecting an unauthorized attacker, it's about detecting an authorized user doing unauthorized things. And so the way we differentiate is that...
Does that inside threat, do you consider an inside threat an attacker along those same lines? Because obviously you guys are looking for anomalous behavior, which from an attacker standpoint, that's rough. From an insider threat, it's much more difficult to determine intent, and obviously you got to be careful from an employer or business standpoint. But from the way you guys are doing that, that really doesn't matter, does it?
No, and that's the point, right? Because a regular user isn't going to go do things that they shouldn't be doing in the regular course. Like, have you ever heard of a regular user probing an endpoint for open ports and services? They don't do that, right? I mean, they're not going to use PowerShell to pull service principal names from Active Directory.
Yeah, that's probably
matter,
bad,
right?
If your users are doing that. That, or maybe it's good and you should promote them into the security department.
Yeah.
or you could give them a slap on the wrist. And I mean, we do have stories of where a customer within the first month found 20 users deviating from the regular, over 20 users actually deviating from the regular duties, and were walked out the door because they had a very strict policy on you cannot do things you're not authorized to do. 20 users within the first month. So, I mean, it does work. It's a lot of what regular users will do is predictable, right? So we don't look at it in terms of anomalous behavior. We're not going to baseline the network. We're not going to baseline every single user activity. What we look for is touches to things that have no production value whatsoever, right? Because a decoy has no production value. It's not going to have real data. A decoy document, it's not going to have real data. Decoy credentials aren't supposed to be touched at all, right? That's the whole point of at least traditional deception, where you have honey tokens or honey data, right? The point is that they don't have any value, so anything that touches them is automatically suspicious. That doesn't necessarily mean malicious, but it does mean suspicious, meaning someone's doing something they're not supposed to be doing. We need to take a closer look at it.
Now, are there technical things outside of like the computer VMs, say for like a honey token or a honey user? Do you guys have technologies built into that to make the accounts more realistic? Because as an attacker, right, like we're typically looking for things like password last set or logon count, looking for those honey tokens so we're not tripping alarms. Do you guys have those kind of user or technologies built in to make them more realistic outside of the computer VMs?
So actually, yes, we do, and that's part of the demo that I'm going to show. So
Sweet.
I'm actually going to run attacks against my Active Directory and show the difference between the responses from a protected system versus an unprotected system.
That's awesome.
And you'll see the differences between the responses.
That was my question to Tyler, is as an attacker, what indicators might they observe from the data coming back to indicate that it might be a deception technology?
So a lot of that too is they're going to check things like, well, does the account exist in Active Directory? Does it have activity? When was the last time it logged in? And beyond even that, are these decoys, are these systems that I'm looking at, are they showing services I expect from, say, a web server or, things of that nature? Does this data look real? And our platform is designed to make it as authentic as possible.
Do you formulate the responses to look like they belong with the company that somebody's attacking, or does that matter?
Well, yes. I mean, it's part of it is, say, for example, if I want to set up a decoy document that will phone home every time somebody opens it, doesn't matter if it's inside the network or outside the network, I will say take old financials, change some of the numbers, change some of the data so it can't hurt you if it leaks out or it gets publicized, and then create that and put it where you don't expect a regular user to touch it, but you can expect attackers to look for it, like a file share on a decoy server. Right. And there are a lot of things that we can do that can make it more authentic and make it more specific. For example, we can take a golden image or a system image from that organization and import it and make it into a decoy. So there is functionally no difference between our decoy and another regular system of the same type.
So you can brand your deception. Is that a thing? Wow.
Well, I mean, for example, I can set up an internal web server pointing to, say, a Swift terminal in a bank, and it would be branded exactly as that bank's Swift terminal.
Very cool.
A lot of the customization is up to the customer. They can go as deep as they want to go.
Is that a templating kind of thing inside the product, or is that something you're going to show today as well?
Well, so I'm not going to get to that level because that actually gets very involved. I mean, things like, because we can set up decoy servers, but we would have to like customize the web pages for things that we want them to do, or we can like use old data that we would need for old production data that's stale, or like old users that are no longer valid to import in and do stuff with, right? So there's a lot of things that would involve, and we do have professional services that will help with that. But when it comes down to it, is I can get a deception environment, or at least a full set of network and endpoint campaigns up and running inside of an hour, after about an hour of learning. Because one of the things that our platform does is it actually will template every single VLAN that it has visibility to and custom craft decoys and credentials, so the network and endpoint campaigns to match what's in that production environment, all the way down to the MAC address OUI.
Joseph, does this require you put an agent on the endpoint, or just stuff in Active Directory?
Nothing in agent. We actually don't even have to touch Active Directory.
Interesting.
Everything is done at the endpoint.
And is there an agent on the endpoint?
No. That's the thing is we have like dissolvable or we have dissolvable scripts that you can run either in non-persistent or persistent mode, and they will do things like install the credentials and set up the Active Directory deceptions at the endpoint, which I'll get into a little bit. But nothing really. You don't have to modify the production Active Directory. As a matter of fact, because we use full operating system VMs and Windows Server is one of those included VMs, you can set up an entirely fake Active Directory environment with fake systems and fake member users, member systems, objects, and even give it a one-way trust to your production Active Directory so it looks real and part of the forest.
I can see a pen tester like being really excited and not being in anything real.
Oh yes, and actually I will show you in the slides that I've got put together an actual alert that our customers sent us about that.
Does this mean that the logging can be integrated, or as far as like the beaconing and detection piece and where that alert and logging gets sent, is that something that's configurable and kind of vendor agnostic, or is that all through your like dashboard, like going out to the internet?
So we've got a lot of different integrations, and we can always output anything to syslog to any SIM that accepts it, or actually any server that accepts syslog, we can send it to. We also can output a lot of our data in Mandiant IOC format, or in as a CSV. We can even output the PCAPs. But you're not limited to using the dashboard. It's just another analysis tool for you. You can always output everything to your SIM and use that as your single point of glass, or your, whatever the new systems are that they're dealing with nowadays, like your SOAR platform or something like that.
Tyler or Larry, you've never fallen into a deception technology. It's interesting. No one wants to admit it. It depends.
Like speed kind of matters when you do end up falling into them, and you usually realize it. You don't always, but. That is one of when you're on a low and slow, it is one of the things you're particularly worried about and always looking for. But sometimes, like you said, you can't help it. If they're built well and they're hard to detect, your ability to circumvent those or navigate around them, you have to do certain actions, and those actions require, a certain level of interaction, which can be detected. So at that point, it is a speed and race condition of time to detection and that time to remediation that really counts.
Yeah, and that's actually because when I was doing pen testing and red teaming, if I got onto a system, the very simple way that I could tell if it was a honeypot or a decoy was look at WinNT System 32 DLL cache. Right, WinNT System 32 DLL cache should have a ton of entries and a lot of subdirectories. And generally, an emulation can handle about 3 or 4 levels. Beyond that, and it barfs. So the first thing I would do is enumerate WinNT system 32. And if I didn't see the expected number and depth of directories, I would leave. I would know that that was a decoy. All you would get is someone touched the decoy, someone ran a command, and someone left. It's enough for a detection. But if it's a full operating system VM, it's going to show you everything you expect to see.
Right.
It's going to have a registry hide. It's going to have services that are running when you do a netstat-an. It's going to have a lot of these things that you look for to see if it's an actual live system. And then there's really nothing you can do to differentiate. If the data looks accurate, there's nothing you can do to differentiate between that decoy and another production system. And that's where we have the most authentic decoys on the market.
And you had some slides in a demo.
Yes,
Joseph.
actually I do. And now hopefully I can get through these relatively quickly. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Now I'm going to try to keep this as brief and simple as possible so that we can get through to the demo. So hopefully you can see my screen.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. Is there any like blocked out? Yeah, I can see some stuff blocked out. I need to hide some of these elements. 1 second. Oh, here. As a matter of fact, here, let me just share these PowerPoint slide. There we go. All right. Are you seeing? I'm still showing the. I have to hide these. The participants. 1 second. All right. There we go. Can you see everything?
Yes.
Yeah.
Perfect. All right. So I'm a technical marketing manager, but I also have another name as technical deception engineer. And although we are adjusting what that is going to mean later, a little bit of myself. Yes, I am a secret squirrel. I was military intelligence for a good part of my career and a counterintelligence agent. So when I started getting into deception, it fit very easily with what I considered part of my bread and butter, which was counterintelligence and military intelligence. Over 20 years, both public and private experience. I am a ENCE, which is an NK certified engineer examiner. So I do network forensics and endpoint forensics. Certified ethical hacker. That's all the way back to version 5. So I've been a CH for a long time. And of course, everyone's got a CISP if you're anywhere in this field. A little bit about Attivo. Over 300 customers globally. 50% of the Fortune 10. That goes up depending on how they're evaluating Fortune 10 at that time, but a majority of our customers are actually considered small and medium-sized enterprises, so less than 5,000 employees, and actually quite a significant chunk of that are less than 1,000 employees. So we can handle the biggest of the big and the medium and small-sized enterprises. That next bullet down where it says we're 2 years in the top 100 of Deloitte Fast 500, which is the 500 fastest growing companies. We actually just got notification that we're in it for a third year. I just don't know if we're in the top 100 yet because they haven't announced it. Pretty well funded. We're actually only in Series C, and we've been running and shipping products since 2014. So we're doing very well. And the whole goal and our whole focus is credential and access protection to deny lateral movement, because we're not looking to compete with any of the prevention controls. As a matter of fact, we partner with a lot of them, but attackers can't have demonstrated that they can evade existing defenses and get in. And once they get in, what we try to do is stop them from breaking out. So why would you choose Attivo? Why would you even look at us, right? So can we all agree at least that the attack surface is expanding? You've got cloud, IoT, and remote work, particularly now, right? Attackers have the advantage when they get in, because if the organization doesn't detect intrusion within as quickly as the first 20 minutes, advanced attackers can break out of the infected system and burrow deeper into the network while remaining undetected. And that 20-minute figure is from CrowdStrike, where they said that the average breakout time is 5 hours, but 18.5 minutes for advanced attackers. Attackers are going to need very specific things to advance their attack, right? Credentials to gain access to systems and move around, privileges to access higher level or restricted functions, and then sensitive and critical data to encrypt or steal. And Attivo detects all of these activities that the attacker will execute to break out from the endpoint. So how does Attivo actually do this? We do it by controlling access. Now, remember how we were just talking about deception? Remember what I said. Deception is just one of the methods that we use to detect an attacker. What we're really doing is controlling access. We're controlling access to the credentials, right? The attack surface, actually, we're removing things like the credentials and remediating misconfigurations that allow attackers to move around, right? We are quickly detecting and attackers and all the attack activity post-compromise, so after they've gotten in. We're restricting access to data and accounts that they can use to move laterally. And we record everything that they do to develop threat intelligence. So this is a bit about the portfolio. AD Secure, which is the first block you see, is for Active Directory protection and is available either as a standalone solution with its own management console or as part of the EDN suite, which is the next box that you see. The Endpoint Detection Net, or EDN suite, is our endpoint defense solution. That includes several different modules and functions that we'll discuss in a little bit. And it's also available as a standalone solution with its own management console or part of the Fabric deployment. Now, that Fabric is set up by the BotSync, which is our server that provides the decoys and manages the entire the management console, the dashboard, everything that you need for the entire Fabric. So let's talk a little bit about Threat Path, which is that first function that I mentioned. So attackers will compromise endpoints, right? That's a given. They're going to find, steal, and reuse any credentials that are stored at the endpoint. They're also going to take advantage of enemies' configurations that allow them to move around. So to fix this, you have to, I'm in the wrong slide. There we go, sorry. To fix this, you have to identify all those stored credentials that could be used by the attacker. You have to remove them before the attacker can use them. And then you have to find the misconfigurations that allow attackers to move laterally. For example, anonymous FTP enabled on a server, or remote registry edit is available, or remote desktop access to anonymous users. Anything that actually basically comes as part of a standard Windows build that you don't remove via policy, you have to look out for. And then you have to look for any new exposures that pop up, right? Because it doesn't help if you do this kind of work and then you don't look at it again. You have to identify whenever the new exposure comes up. Someone accidentally stores an admin account on an endpoint to make their job a little bit easier to connect to a jump box to get to Active Directory.
Is this a Windows-only product then, or Active
No,
Directory
that's the beautiful
specific?
part. This is not a Windows-only product, although the Active Directory piece is, and I'll get into that, but this works for all. It doesn't matter if you're running Mac, Windows, or Linux. This will work for all. So the Threat Path solution actually is exactly what this solution does, right? It looks for and finds stored credentials and misconfigurations. It remediates them automatically, and then it monitors for new ones. Now, if the attacker can't compromise stored credentials and misconfigurations because there aren't any, then you've effectively reduced your attack surface. So if you think about that, right, what we mentioned earlier, you've got cloud, you've got IoT, you've got remote work. Reducing your attack surface, particularly right now, is kind of essential, because as people expand and as organizations expand to allow remote work from anywhere, doesn't matter if you're doing it via VPN or you're using a SaaS provider and storing your data up in the cloud, you're expanding your attack surface. And so you need to find a way to control that. Now, you can do a lot of the technologies that are dedicated for, say, cloud security, but that still leaves your VPN. And having just had this discussion earlier, most VPNs are relatively flat. And an attacker that gets in has full access to everything because you can't tell where the scanning is coming from when you're in a VPN segment.
Joseph, with this solution, does this take care of the scenarios where there's credentials in memory and or local admin on any of the systems? So even if those things do happen, the Attivo solution will basically mask that that's there.
So the Threat Path solution is specifically for stored credentials and the misconfigurations. Now, if you've used an admin account and it's still in memory, that becomes available. But then we do have other functions that will actually hide or at least detect that activity when they try to do something to find that.
Gotcha.
So there's something like Mimikatz where you can pull. There are other functions that we have that would detect those attempts to sort of pull credentials, but it's mainly it's kind of difficult because when you're dealing with memory and a lot of that volatile information, it's difficult to monitor it when you're not using an agent. And because we don't use an agent, we don't monitor for everything that shows up within memory. But what we do look for are unauthorized applications that show up and attempt to do things, and that includes things like scraping memory for hashes and credentials. So this is sort of what threat path looks like. We are actually updating the interface, so there's a bit more to it than this. But what it comes down to is that threat path displays the information graphically or in a table. And then you can do searches and filters to find specific credential sets or critical paths that you defined. So you notice on this graphic, I've got a few that are purple. Those are high severity exposures. Those are critical paths because they point to either elevated credentials or specific servers and VLANs that I've identified as critical, and that I want to make sure that I don't have any paths to them from other systems, right? Because if you think about it logically, if an attacker gets on a system and he finds credentials, those credentials point to other hosts. He now has a path from that system to that host because of the credential. So what we do is we reduce those paths by reducing the stored credentials that are on the endpoints that you would consider critical. Any questions?
No.
Great. All right. So now let's talk about Active Directory, because Active Directory is a heavily targeted target, for lack of a better word, by attackers, right? Attackers on any member Active Directory system could query Active Directory and find objects or accounts to use them for privilege escalation and other activities, such as identifying AD controllers, admin or shadow admin accounts, or even service principal names. Now, for those who don't know, service principal names are registered services to Active Directory that indicate that a particular server is authorized to offer a particular service. So if I can run a setspn dash HTTPS, I would identify every single server that has secure HTTP running on port 443. Now, what does that give me? Targets. As an attacker, I've now identified targets to attack. So how do you fix this? Well, you have to misinform the attacker somehow. You have to give them fake information. And you have to identify the queries when they do them. That's kind of hard, identifying queries, right? Because essentially you're just running native. You don't need to load any kind of quote-unquote hacker tool. You can just use command.exe or PowerShell, and you can run these queries. And if you're on a member system, ADs are going to respond and give you everything you want. Its dance card is completely open. So if you can find those unauthorized queries and you can give them fake information, you're doing what the AD Secure solution is doing. It detects. It makes it all very easy, because that's very hard to do manually. It can detect and identify unauthorized queries, hide sensitive results, and insert decoy results in their place. Now, these decoy results are, for lack of a better term, honey tokens. We call them fake credentials, right? And these fake credentials can either point to a black hole IP address or a decoy that will respond to that appropriate service or that appropriate login, right? And you see how these things build on each other. We're now building layered defenses of utilizing all aspects of the platform. That's why we call it a fabric. So if you alert on the queries and any processes that spawn them, even native tools, you're getting an early alert during the most vulnerable part of the attacker's attack, which is the discovery and reconnaissance phases, right? Organizations, if you can control what an attacker sees, if you can deny them privilege escalation and lateral movement, and you can collect data and develop the threat intelligence off of that data, you've got the advantage. So let's delve into this a little bit more thoroughly. Active Directory is a high-value target. It is a single source repository for pretty much everything that you need to access the enterprise. It is critical. And it contains some of the most sensitive and critical data for that enterprise, right? Privileged users, personal roles, like key executives. Would you like to know what the login is for the CEO? I would, if I was an attacker. Critical data location, sensitive systems, and even system information. Yes, Active Directory will tell you the OS patch level of a particular system. They don't even need admin rights. That's the thing, though. This is regular user rights. I don't have to elevate to admin rights to get to this. Regular user accounts can give me everything that I need as an attacker to target, for example, your Jenkins server, insert malware into your CI/CD infrastructure, and have it install on everything. Now, as a ransomware attacker, that is valuable. So this is a typical AD attack sequence, right? So this is typically what an attacker would do that's using AD as part of their attack. You're going to gain a foothold. That's typically a phishing email. You're going to do reconnaissance and discovery. You're going to look for valuable objects and accounts and privileges, right? This is where you're going to use things like Bloodhound to identify the shortest path to becoming a domain admin, like the DEF CON talk, 6 degrees to domain admin. Great talk, by the way. And then you're going to move to that domain admin PC and compromise it. You're going to steal the domain admin credentials. You're going to get to Active Directory and create persistence. You're going to create either your own domain admin account or you're going to elevate. And now that you've identified all the critical assets, you're going to go after them. Where can this go wrong? If you can disrupt the attacker during the reconnaissance phase, you interrupt everything downstream. An attacker can't target their attacks if they don't have accurate information. Remember how I said that counterintelligence was one of my functions in the military? This is counterintelligence. This is denying the attacker's ability to collect on your assets. And this is critical. So how does AD Secure actually do this? Well, Bob's laptop is going to make a query from, say, PowerShell, right? Maybe he's an admin. Maybe he's an infected system. We don't know yet. But we're going to observe that query and report it to the console. Bob's system just made a query. The Active Directory is going to respond to that query. And AD Secure is going to validate the query and decide if it'll intervene. If it's good, let it through. If it's bad, you hide the critical objects. And by critical objects, I mean things like domain controllers, Active Directory domain admins, enterprise admins, shadow admin rights, service principal names for specific services, anything. You're going to hide them and you're going to insert fake data in their place that looks real but points to decoys. Or it can point to a black hole so that they get nothing, but you get the alert. And then we're going to gather all that information for reporting and analysis. So you've got an easy place to quickly analyze all the information and make a determination. Now, when I did forensics, sometimes it would take me a half hour just to identify if a system was worth investigating, because I would have to do a full network image and I would have to go through and look for indicators and marks. And if it was a bad pull because, hey, that system went offline and then a new system took the IP and all I had was the alert IP to go by, and I imaged the system and a half hour later, I realized it's the wrong system, that's a half hour of my time wasted. If I give you everything inside of a dashboard, you can make a determination in 1 to 2 minutes.
Joseph,
having worked in a SOC, go ahead.
How is the query validated? In your workflow, it's, if the policies validate that the query is good, it lets it through. If not, it basically gives it fake objects. What makes the difference between a valid and not valid query?
Applications and user IDs, right? So as a regular user, I'm not expected to run a set SPN command as a regular user. As an admin, I am, and I'm authorized to do that. So if I was an admin and I ran PowerShell to run a query, Active Directory AD Secure is going to return to me a proper response. If I was a regular user and I ran a set SPN command, I'm not authorized to do that. So AD Secure is going to see that, realize I'm not part of an authorized group, intercept the real results, hide the real accounts that I'm looking at, or hide the real service principal names I'm looking at, and return decoys in its place. Or if I use an unauthorized application, there's no reason Bloodhound should be on a regular user's computer, right? If it's there, it was payload that was dropped, or SharpHound or anything like that. It was payload that was dropped by an attacker. So if I see that and it's an unauthorized process, I'm going to return fake information. Because regular users do regular things. We expect them to. And we expect admins to do certain things, regular things. But and so as an organization, I know what they're authorized to use, so I can whitelist it. I can whitelist specific accounts. I can whitelist specific user groups as part of the access control list. Everything else gets a fake result. Make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So now let's talk about the Fleck. The Fleck's actually really cool. Attackers conduct in-network recon. They have to find other targets to compromise inside the network. So they're going to conduct reconnaissance and fingerprint any system that they find. Now, I don't mean doing host discovery, because no one really does host discovery anymore, right? You're not going to run an nmap /-A across an entire /C, right? Or /24. You're not going to do that. No one does that anymore. what I'm going to do is I'm going to increment or decrement. I'm going to work low and slow. I'm going to look at what's stored, what credentials are stored on the endpoint, and I'm going to identify the targets. I'm going to check DNS. I'm going to look at Active Directory and pull service principal names, but I'm not going to run network scans. They're noisy. Don't matter how slow you run them. Eventually, someone is going to detect it. Matter of fact, a network decoy is going to detect it. So if I can do host discovery in other ways, then I just have to figure out what type of system it is. So I fingerprint it. To fingerprint it, you need to do port and service scans. You need to identify what parts are open to sort of identify, hey, is this running port 80? Okay, port 80 is open, 443 is open, SQL is open. Okay, might be SQL Server with an HTTPS front end. Or, it's got SSH, so maybe that's what they use to upload things. So, but that is considered a critical or a signifier of a critical function. So fingerprinting, you're identifying systems. Then you're going to target critical data for theft, destruction, or encryption. Because if those assets have critical data, I'm going to do something with them. I can hold it for ransom. I can encrypt it, force them to pay me, or release it, right? If I encrypt your Active Directory, you're dead in the water unless you pay me $2 million. And it's happening. It's happened recently, right? So how do you solve this? Well, you can prevent fingerprinting, make all systems look similar. You can detect discovery and lateral movement early, and you can identify those CTPs and IOCs so that you can make adjustments to your security posture. And the deflect function helps you with this. So deflect is part of the endpoint detection net, EDN. It detects inbound and outbound port and service probes. It redirects those connection attempts that touch closed ports or services to decoys that will respond. And it can limit all inbound and outbound traffic to only talk to the decoys. So imagine that. If I probe, right? If I probe a Windows endpoint and I look at port 80 and port 80 responds to me, or I look at port 22 and port 22 responds to me, I think that Windows endpoint is actually a Windows server. Or if it responds with SSH, I think it might be a Linux server, right? If you can't accurately fingerprint every system because it responds in a similar manner, then you can reduce the lateral movement impact. You can get early alerting during the discovery phase, which is the important part, again, when they're trying to break out. And again, you can update your security controls based on the activity you're seeing. So this is what it's going to look like, right? So the system on the top, red, that's an infected system. It's going to try to connect via HTTP and SSH. Well, SSH, okay, it's going to allow through. HTTP, it's going to forward to a decoy. So it's going to tunnel that inbound traffic that's interrogating a closed port to a decoy for engagement. So the system has SSH. It's a protected system. It has SSH. So it's going to allow that through because that's a normal working function. And again, the environment should not interfere with normal operations. So it's going to let that connection through. But it's going to see that HTTP request touching a closed port. It's going to redirect that to port 80 on a decoy web server, and the decoy web server is going to respond. Now the attacker thinks that the system he just touched is actually a Windows HTTP server or Apache server, whatever. Now, outbound, same thing. If you're attacking from a protected system and you attempt the same type of activity, it's going to allow the regular traffic through, and any closed port it touches on that interrogation, it's going to forward to a decoy with a corresponding open port and service. And then for the native quarantine, you can force it so that the attacker, that endpoint, can only talk inbound or outbound to the decoy environment. That's a native quarantining function, and it prevents them from doing anything from that specific endpoint to any other production system, because all they can do is talk to decoys or talk to a black hole IP if you choose not to use decoys.
And how is that enforced?
So we do it via native functions, actually. So again, we look for any connection that attempts to hit a port that doesn't have a running service, but we have a decoy that does. We can specify services that it will respond or deflect, and everything else will still bounce. So if I say hit random high port 64155, there's nothing running on that, that's going to bounce. But I'm running Windows HTTP, and I'm running web servers, right? So 80, I'm going to create a decoy that is running a web server on 80 and 443. And any connection attempts that hit a system that doesn't have a web server, the decoy is going to respond because it's going to forward that traffic to the decoy. So it knows what open ports and services are on each endpoint. Any closed port that receives a connection request, it's going to forward to the decoy. If it's configured to do specific ports only and just regular bounces for the rest, it's going to do that as well. You can be very granular with the services that you forward. So now you're thinking as a red teamer, how do you get around this? That's the thing, it's kind of hard. If every system responds appropriately, you can't fingerprint it. Any questions on this?
And it does all this with no agent running on?
No agent. It uses native functions.
Gotcha.
Hey, there's
Pretty
a
cool.
question that came in on our Discord server. Someone is asking how much Attivo directed authorized user information is included or recommended, meaning training or heads up for employees of the clients that are using your tool.
So again, you should not have to impact production. There's no reason for your admins to be trained to worry about the redirection function or the AD secure function, because you're going to whitelist them. If they belong to an authorized group, you're going to whitelist that group. If there is a one-off, you're going to authorize that one-off user, right? So he should never see the AD secure redirection or the AD secure hiding authorized query responses. It really all depends. So from a customer standpoint, it really depends. We've had customers that are very upfront. We are using this technology. If you run into it, you are in trouble. We have others that, to help identify insider threat, keep the knowledge that this is in the environment to a very small select few groups, because now they're looking for specific insider activity. And we have gotten, again, like I said, we've gotten detections, and we've had customers walk out employees for doing things they're not authorized to do because of that. So it comes down to, we don't recommend any. It really comes down to the specific customer needs, and as I said, we do have a customer success or a program where we have customer success representatives and professional services help with those decisions, help with the planning, and help with the deployment. So again, it comes down to the risk tolerance of a particular organization. Some will want to let everyone know this is in the environment, others won't. Does that answer the question?
Yes, I believe it does. Thank you.
Perfect. All right. Now let's get to something else. Data cloak. What does that sound like to you? Sounds like hiding data. Well, it's kind of important because attackers will get onto a system and they're going to steal or encrypt data for a ransomware attack or credentials to move laterally and escalate privileges. And you fight this by concealing local admin privilege accounts, hiding files, folders, shares, or other storage, and alerting on any activity that attempts to find them. Think to yourself how hard that would be. And that's the goal of the data cloak function. The data cloak function started out as a way to fight ransomware. So originally we named it anti-ransomware, but it evolved quickly to cover local credential theft as well. You can hide files and restrict access to them. And I will show you this. It's actually really cool. It's going to alert when an attacker tries to find them, and then capture all the commands for threat intelligence development. And you can control what the attacker sees on a system. You can reduce the risk and impact of any data loss. And you can, again, collect TTPs for threat intelligence. So these are the elements that the data cloak function can conceal. You can hide these things. Even removable file shares, like USB drives, because there are ransomware that will spread via USB. DFS and network shares, cloud shares, domain, again, those domain controllers, Active Directory, all of that falls under data concealment. So consider this. When an attacker attempts to enumerate any of those elements, the solution not only generates an alert, but it restricts their ability to even see them. And I'll show you that in a second. So here's a real world example of an attack of a customer actually sending us this. This is an alert that they got in the middle of their red team test. So they had deployed the AD Secure solution, among other things, during a red team test to help the blue team and see if it will be effective. And we always recommend this. If you're going to run a red team test, try us out. We actually offer a 30-day free trial for AD Secure so that you can try out and see if it will work in your environment. And within 20 commands, they identified the red team incursion within 20 commands. And everything that they captured, they actually showed to the red team during the debrief. And the red team was surprised that they were caught so quickly. I believe it was within, so 20 commands, that was approximately 2 minutes from their initial incursion. They discovered the red team. They saw that the red team was going after Active Directory. The AD Secure function sent them to a fake environment. And then, the red team actually continued attacking for 48 hours, believing it to be a production Active Directory controller. And needless to say, all that data, so I don't know if you can see this, the description actually shows all of the events and gives you a lot of deep information on what they did. They actually brute forced it by using T11111, which is a domain account that was specifically created for them. So here's the fun part. We get to go to the demo. So let me stop sharing for a second. I'm going to head and pull up 2 systems that are part of the same Active Directory environment. And
Joseph, how long did your demo do you think it was going to take?
5 minutes, maybe.
Okay, you have 10, so you're good. I just want to make sure we can get through it. Yeah.
Perfect. All right. So, and then I'm going to pull up the console so that you can see sort of what it looks like. All right, so for this, I'm going to share my entire screen. Okay, so what you see right now is my demo environment. Notice there are no alerts within the past hour. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run several commands. So the system on the left, the purple system, is unprotected. The system on the right is protected. Now, this is a batch file I'm running just to show you the commands that I'm going to be running. Notice there are no scripted responses. So I'm going to run several commands. DC list, nltest.dc list will give me a listing of all the production Active Directory domain controllers. Notice in the unprotected system, I'm getting live systems. Notice on the same Active Directory, same command, I'm getting a fake servers. These are decoys. Okay, the nltest ds get dc tells me which domain controller I'm connected to. I'm connected to ADSE demo. Here, I should get the same information, but I don't. I'm connected to Marwin server SE demo local. Okay, I'm going to enumerate the domain admins group. Now, this is all built in. These are all built-in commands. This gives me live systems, live user names, live user IDs. This gives me Hollywood actors. Now, clearly, Brad Pitt doesn't work for me. Doesn't work in my environment. So I'm going to check Amy Gully to see if she's got information. Notice the type of information. This is actually how attackers validate a domain user by running this command, which is the net user username/domain. I'm going to run the same thing with Brad Pitt. Same information. Last logon, 11/5, so a week ago. Last logon, 11/9. So same type of information, what I'm expecting to see. Okay, now, set SPN, I mentioned this before. This will query for all HTTPS servers. Notice the code repo and the CRM. Notice when I run it here, I get WinServer and WinServer SE demo. Again, the decoys. Now, just to see, I'm going to ping. Now, that looks like it was the wrong one. So let me try, let's see, I'm going to ping WinServer1, sorry. And again, I get a response. So that tells me as an attacker, this is a live system because it's getting a response. It's generating a response. Okay, K-list. Everyone understands what Kerberos tickets are, I'm hoping. K-list is how you list Kerberos tickets that are in memory. It's another way to not only validate the domain, but also steal those Kerberos tickets, because they can persist for up to 10 hours, and you can replay them to do what's called a golden ticket or a silver ticket attack. So this tells me I'm on ADSE demo, and I can pull this Kerberos ticket if I wanted to. This tells me I'm on Mar Windserve SE demo. Again, the same type of information, just decoy data. Okay, I'm going to look for the local administrators. This shows that I have several local administrators. Now, I'm going to pull up the, oops, my apologies, clicked the wrong button. I'm going to pull up the, okay, oops, I connected to the protected. There we go. Okay, I'm going to pull up the snap-in to show what Windows sees as the domain admins on the protected system. Okay. So notice that I have the same type of information, right? Demo user, SE demo. Now, when I run that same command, I should get the same data, right? Notice what's hidden. Notice I inserted decoy demo admin. And all the other ones are missing. So that's hiding and denying access to local accounts. Now, I'm also going to check to see for network shares. The net use command, clearly the X drive is there. Let me close this. Oops, cancel. Notice here's the X drive on this system. And it's a GUI, right? So a regular user will use a GUI. Command line, it's missing. But even better, I've inserted 2 decoy file shares that are hidden from the user, pointing to those decoy file shares. So now I'm going to show some more interesting stuff. Inside this protected system, right? I know, okay, I'm logged on as user X, as you saw. Notice there's a hide me folder. So let's go to users/user X, and I'm going to do a directory. Notice the hide me folder is missing from the command line, but it's showing in the GUI. And there is stuff in hide me. Here's a test directory. Here's a test file. I'm going to write to it, and I'm going to save it and close it. So I can write to it, but I can't, for some reason, enumerate hide me. Let's see if I can delete it. Nope, can't find it, but it's here, and it still exists. Now, hide me is, that's pretty typical. You wouldn't expect to find hide me. What about in the documents folder? Okay, there's a bunch of stuff in the documents folder, right? So let's do CD to documents folder. How many files do you see here? 2. How many files do you see here? More. I've actually hidden all PDFs, Excel spreadsheets, PowerPoints, and document files. So if I, as an attacker, because I don't get GUI access, I only get command line, if I, as an attacker, enumerate this, I am not going to get anything. But what if I know it's there? Let's try to delete it. Nope, not found. It's right here. Okay, so now let's do the last really fun part. Let's try to do SSH. So clearly, this system, oops, netstat. Clearly, the system is not running any other services except the basic Windows services. What if I try to connect to it via web server? The IP address of this is 192.168.5.24. I get a login to my ADP. How could that be when I don't have port 80 running? And these are, I mean, it's a standard server. I mean, it's a standard Windows workstation, so port 80 wouldn't be running. What if I SSH to it? I shouldn't get a connection, and yet I do. Okay, now I apparently stole the wrong password for Bad Pit, but I shouldn't be getting this login prompt because there is no port 22 open or listening on this endpoint, and yet I'm getting a login prompt. That's the deflect function in action. That is deflecting an attempted connection to a closed port, and it's sending it over to a live port and service on a decoy. Now, just to prove everything that I'm talking about here, here's all the alerts that we just got. Let's look at the events. Let's go to everything very low. How would you like to know that someone just tried to SSH and used a user that does not exist? How about recon information? Here is a deflect inbound recon, inbound TCP port scan on a non-existent service. Here's a web attempted to access a non-existent file, which is the favicon, right? Looking for a system. Here's the HTTP GET request, right? Let's look at the endpoint reports. Remember all of those commands that I ran, the net use and everything else? Here they are. There's the net use X, tells me that the net executable executed it from command line, which was spawned by explorer.exe. Here's the set SPN command, which was spawned by command.exe. Here's all of the things that ran at the endpoint. So all of these things tell me that someone was just attacking on my system. And if I decided to, here's everything that the attacker just did. Here's the SSH connection. Here's the defensive evasion, persistence. Notice that these are MITRE attack categories. So yes, we flag everything with MITRE attack. Here's a deceptive credential use. Here's the discovery attempt, attempting to do the connection. Here's the lateral movement, deflection outbound to local 80, port 80. So this is the power. Again, all this happens very quickly, and yet you're getting all of this information. So that ends the demo portion of it. Is there any questions before I conclude?
No, good stuff, Joseph. I think that these are valid techniques to detect many of the attackers that are out there today. Because like you said, their first step is to collect information, and you're going to see that and basically lie to them and send them in a rabbit hole. I liked the pen test team. I think that's pretty telling as well, in addition to the reporting. It's all good stuff. Thank you, Joseph, for coming on the show. It was wonderful. We're a little over time, so I'm going to wrap up. SecurityWeekly.com/Attivo. Attivo Networks, I should say. SecurityWeekly.com/Attivo Networks. Joseph, you said a 30-day free trial for AD Secure, correct?
That is correct. You just have to contact us.
Outstanding. Thanks so much, Joseph.
Thank you very much.
Coming up next, Qualys, talking about container security. Stay tuned.